Well, hi, everyone, and greetings from Northern Michigan. This is Bob the Science Guy. Last Tuesday, I had a wonderful video interview with Dr. Bryan Peck, and he and I went through the movie Plandemic with a fine-tooth comb and evaluated it for medical and scientific accuracy. Personally, I think the interview turned out really well, and a lot of the viewers thought it was really quite interesting and informative. YouTube, however, did not share my enthusiasm for the video. They took it down based on what they called a term of service violation. Now, I didn't get a strike for that. They just took the video down. So I tried to find out exactly what it was they didn't like about the video and really didn't get anywhere with them. That's still an ongoing process. So what I did was I re-edited the video completely and broke it up into 4 parts. And I'm going to publish this on my alternate channel, which is this one. And I'm going to concurrently publish it on my Facebook page. So let's go ahead and enjoy the first of this series, which I call The Questionable Hero's Journey, Hijacking a Crisis. So let's cue up the music and get going. Let's go ahead and just do some brief introductions. My guest tonight is going to be Dr. Bryan Peck. Bryan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, about what you do and what your experience in medicine is?
My name is, I'm not going to give you my full name. My favorite pseudonym is Bryan Peck. I'm actually still trying to get used to the idea of being called doctor. It's very weird. I'm a third-year resident in internal medicine. And I have a little bit of background in epidemiology as a part of a research project that I was in medical school. And I also have a little bit of a physics background and was a part of the NASA space grant back in my undergraduate.
I've been an internal medicine physician for the last 25 years. I've practiced in both the outpatient setting and the inpatient setting, to include in the intensive care unit. I went through the same training that Bryan did. And quite frankly, between the two of us, I think that we can probably handle this pretty well. Bryan is probably even more up to date than I am because he's still actively in his training. I'm kind of the voice of experience going on. If we can go ahead and get this thing going, do you want to go ahead and get started with the video and see what they have to say?
Absolutely. Let me just go ahead and make one quick notation. I actually was watching this thing a little bit through before, and they go to Kent Hovind levels of lying at certain points of this, so it's going to be fun.
It's absolutely amazing. And, the lady that does this is a PhD virologist. And we'll talk about her a little bit as we go on. But let's go ahead and get started with the video and see what we have, okay?
Dr. Judy Mikovits has been called one of the most accomplished scientists of her generation. Her 1991 doctoral thesis revolutionized the treatment of HIV/AIDS. At the height of her career, Dr. Mikovits published a blockbuster article in the journal Science. The controversial article sent shockwaves through the scientific community as it revealed that the common use of animal and human fetal tissues were unleashing devastating plagues of chronic diseases. For exposing their deadly secrets, the minions of Big Pharma waged war on Dr. Mikovits, destroying her good name, career, and personal life. Now, as the fate of nations hang in the balance, Dr. Mikovits is naming names of those behind the plague of corruption that places all human life in danger. So you made a discovery that conflicted with the agreed-upon narrative.
Correct.
And for that, they did everything in their powers to destroy your life.
Correct.
You were arrested.
Correct.
And then you were put under a gag order.
For 5 years, if I went on social media, if I said anything at all, they would find new evidence and put me back in jail. And it was one of the few times I cried.
Now, Bryan, you and I have both read innumerable scientific papers. Have you ever heard a preface to a scientific paper that kind of went like that?
Never. I've also even heard of this person until just now.
Oh, she's been around for a while. But here's the interesting thing about this. Now, we're starting off with a poisoning of the well type thing. We have the dedicated and persecuted crusader here. And the unnamed Big Pharma them is prosecuting her to the point that she was put, quote unquote, in prison, and her truth has been suppressed. But now she's free of that, and she apparently is expressing the truth on YouTube, but they censored her. She expressed the truth on Facebook, but Facebook censored her. And now she's out on BitChute, where she can express the truth again. Is this a story that we've heard before?
Yeah, this is very much in the line of a lot of things that you see. You get it from the people who are pushing B17 as a cure. You get this from people that are
vitamin B17.
Yeah, you get this from people who are pushing like the QAnon stuff. This is not an unusual story she's telling.
No, it is not. So let's go ahead and see exactly who this young lady is. Her claim to fame is this particular article right here, where she is doing some research on chronic fatigue syndrome. And this is the article that she claims was suppressed. It was actually retracted because it was found that her samples were all contaminated. And the way that they found that her samples were contaminated was other researchers attempted to replicate her studies and reproduce her results. And that's pretty normal in scientific method, isn't it, Brian?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's kind of a cornerstone of scientific method.
Yeah, and the actual following of how this all went down was actually insane to go through. Not limited to or including the fact that the company that created the test to look for this was actually the same company that she was working for during this paper, the Parker Institute. Mm-hmm. And they found that the actual test itself was contaminated with the proteins that they were looking for.
So in other words, the test was designed, or the test was not, I shouldn't say designed, but because it was contaminated, all the tests would be positive.
Yeah, they came up with positive results that were so incredibly high that the only thing they could possibly think of was that they had found some sort of miracle association. Mm-hmm. The only problem is that they didn't seem to give it any credence, give it any outside verification before they just ran with it.
Well, that's kind of not really the way it should be done, but that may not necessarily be this lady's fault. That's the fault of her company. But one of the things that I did notice was that she claims that she was fired from this company. Did you look into that at all?
I couldn't figure out why, other than she had an explosive relationship with somebody else using the same lab space.
Exactly. What happened is she was fired for insubordination because she refused to share her cell line with one of her former colleagues. And as a result, she was let go from this company. Now, generally, when you have a quote-unquote star researcher, that's kind of the last one that you let go due to budget cuts. You know, they can empty their own trash and take it to the dumpster themselves, but they're not the person that you let go to save money. Generally, if you are a researcher, if you're let go from a company like this, it's because there's something about you that is incompatible with a company. Either one, your research methods are flawed, or two, your personality is mercurial and your coworkers can't stand you. And they just, it just makes it a bad work environment. It sounds like there was a combination of a lot of things going on. First, the paper was retracted, and then she was discharged from the company. But then she talks about going to prison. And what exactly did that have to do with any of this conspiracy that she's talking about? Well, what happened was she was actually arrested for taking intellectual property from her company. She took all of her research notebooks. She apparently took computer files that belonged to the company that were proprietary information. And that's theft. And depending on what the intent of that was, that could very well be a crime, and she was arrested. Now, the article that I read said she was briefly incarcerated in county jail, but she certainly wasn't thrown in a dungeon anywhere or in prison. She wasn't convicted of anything. She was incarcerated until she posted bond, pending resolution of these charges. Apparently, they were eventually dropped when they searched her home, found the material, and returned it to its rightful owner. So
I'm not sure what she means by thrown in prison in any way, shape, or form. As far as I can tell, she spent 4 days in lockup.
Yeah.
Before she was gone.
You spend more time in lockup for child support than that. I mean, seriously. And basically, this is designed specifically to try and present her as the persecuted truth seeker, which is something that is designed specifically to strike a nerve in the population and the demographic that she's trying to reach. And that has nothing to do with COVID-19. It has to do with the anti-vax movement, but we'll have more on that later. So let's go ahead and continue this for a moment and have a listen to some of this now that we got some of that initial nonsense straightened out.
There was no evidence the first time, and when you can unleash that kind of force to force someone into bankruptcy with a perfect credit score, and so that I couldn't bring my 97 witnesses, which included the heads, Tony Fauci, Ian Lipkin, the heads of the public health in HHS, who would have had to testify that we did absolutely nothing wrong.
And so what did they charge you with?
Nothing.
But you were in jail.
I was held in jail with no charges. I was called a fugitive from justice. No warrant. Literally drugged me out of the house. Our neighbors are looking at what's going on here. They searched my house without a warrant, literally terrorized my husband for 5 days. They said, if you don't find the notebooks, if you don't find the material, which was not in my possession, but planted in my house.
As if you took intellectual property from the laboratory. Is
Yes,
that correct?
It was intended to appear as if I took confidential material, names, and intellectual property from the laboratory.
So here's the situation that we have right now. She claims that this was a false charge. She denies having taken the notebooks and the computer files, although a news report at the time with an interview with her attorney indicated that it was simply just a mistake, that she had no intention of taking these materials, although she did, and they're going to be returned. Okay, so the other thing that I really like about this is you notice how they use video of a SWAT raid, where you have combat-ready police officers with automatic weapons raiding her for this nothing charge, as she calls it. I really don't think that's an actual video of the raid on her house. I think somebody came up, knocked on the door, and said, where are the notebooks and where are the computer files? And that was that. In fact, she was not raided at her house for her arrest. She literally turned herself into the college police department. So this is just kind of overblown a little bit. But let's go ahead and continue. Brian, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I was just looking over any notes I had from this section, and you just covered exactly what I was going to. We're good to go.
All right, let's do it.
Heads of our entire HHS colluded and destroyed my reputation, and the Department of Justice and the FBI sat on it and kept that case under seal, which means you can't say there's a case or your lawyers are held in contempt of court. So you can't even get a lawyer to defend you. So every single due process right was taken away from me, and to this day remains the same. I have no constitutional freedoms or rights.
Yet you sit here. I think a lot of people would probably have just taken the retirement out early, laid low, but you have decided to come forth when your gag order has been released to write a book called Plague of Corruption, Restoring Faith in the Promise of Science, and you are naming names.
Absolutely.
Apparently, their attempt to silence you has failed. And I have to ask, how do you sit here with confidence to call out these great forces and not fear for your life as you leave this building?
Because if we don't.
Oh, for God's sake, fear for her life as she leaves the building after exercising her intact constitutional rights to speak her mind? Come on, guys. I do want to make one quick note that was pointed out by Dr. Mike the other day. I'm going to go ahead and put Bryan back on here for a second. All right, Bryan, you're back on. It's interesting that she's talking about fearing for her life for this. But I found something that was rather interesting on this film. It was actually pointed out by Dr. Mike the other day. Let's go ahead and see what we have here.
Awesome.
Right here. That's what I was looking for. Look at that right there. Right at the bottom. You see it? Forward by Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of an interesting thing.
And you are naming names.
Absolutely.
Apparently, their attempt to silence you has failed. And I have to ask, how do you sit here with confidence to call out these great forces and not fear for your life as you leave this building?
Because if we don't stop this now, we can not only forget our republic and our freedom, but we can forget humanity because we'll be killed by this agenda.
So Anthony Fauci.
My name is Dr. Tony Fauci. I'm the director.
The man who is heading the pandemic task force was involved in a cover-up.
He directed the cover-up. And in fact, everybody else was paid off, and paid off big time. Millions of dollars in funding from Tony Fauci, Tony Fauci's organization, National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. These investigators that committed the fraud continue to this day to be paid big time by the NIAID.
And the whole world is listening to his advice for how to handle this current pandemic. How do we know that what he's saying is what we need to be learning?
What he's saying is absolute propaganda, and the same kind of propaganda that he's perpetrated to kill millions since 1984.
We know from this study quite clearly that there will be a delay in progression significantly greater than for individuals who do not take the drug.
It started really when I was 25 years old. I was part of the team that isolated HIV from the saliva and blood of the patients from France, where Luc Montagnier had originally isolated the virus.
Je pense qu'il y a toute une recherche à faire à ce niveau-là qui est négligée parce que
This was a confirmatory study, but Tony Fauci and Robert Gallo were working together then to spin the story in a different way. At that time, Dr. Rossetti was out of town, and Tony Fauci says, we understand that you have a paper in press, and we want a copy of it. And I said, yes, there's a paper in press, and it's confidential, and no, I will not give you a copy of it. He started screaming at me, then he said, give us the paper right now, or you'll be fired for insubordination. And I just said, I'm sure when Dr. Rossetti gets back, you can have the conversation. And so Frank comes back, several weeks later, and is really bullied into giving Fauci the paper. Fauci holds up the publication of the paper for several months while Robert Gallo writes his own paper and takes all the credit. And of course, patents are involved. This delay of the confirmation, literally led to spreading the virus around, killing millions.
Bryan, do you have any clue whatsoever what on earth she's talking about?
No, not really, because it doesn't make any sense that she was contacted. At 25 years old, she would have been a lab monkey. She didn't get her PhD until 91. She may have worked there, but there's no way that she was the one being called on. I can't even find anything that she was actually a part of the team that was in the isolation team.
So let's just go ahead and get this straight. So she got her actual doctorate in virology in 1991. Is that right?
Correct.
And I seem to recall when HIV started rearing its head, and that was around somewhere between 80 and 82.
Gallo's papers were in 84.
84. So, and she was 25 at that time, which meant that she was a college grad, but she was a good 7 years out of her PhD. She wasn't even in grad school yet, was she?
She could have been in grad school.
She could have been going for like a master's and then her PhD. But I don't think somebody that is 1 or 2 years out of college is going to be on a team that's on the cutting edge of virology in a worldwide HIV epidemic. Do you? I mean,
No.
The World Health Organization probably wasn't knocking on her door, seeking her advice.
I can't imagine what she thinks is going on, or how she thinks that she has this much importance in something. Her entire story really just seems to be, I'm important, everyone else who you think is important is bad. And it's a very weird thing to put out there.
Yeah, it is. It's not really the way science works either, is it? I mean,
anyway,
you've done lab work, you've done research, haven't you?
I have.
All right. Quite
Cases where
frankly,
I wasn't one of the contributing author. I was just a monkey, and people didn't come to me for things. They especially didn't come to one of my lab. They didn't come to me as a lab worker and demand that I hand a paper over to them.
You know, it kind of strikes me as strange that they would A, know she was writing a paper, or B, know what her name was.
And if she is an author of that paper, then she is open to be able to give them that paper.
Yeah.
You don't need the consent of all authors.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it strikes me as being rather bizarre. But this is starting to get interesting. Let's go ahead and have a look at it again.
Perhaps no one expressed the anguish of AIDS better than New York writer Larry Kramer. But he was even more angry at the federal government and the pharmaceutical industry. One person who felt Kramer's fury was NIH Dr. Anthony Fauci.
It's still been crushing to me to think that I didn't know my work in 1999 was something that had been avoided. From 83 and 82, when the virus was isolated, the virus didn't have to wait until 84 to be confirmed. Think of how many people, the entire continent of Africa, lost a generation as that virus was spread through because of the arrogance of a group of people, and it includes Robert Redfield, who's now the head of the CDC. Right along with Tony Fauci. They were working together to take credit and make money, and they had the patents on it and tailored them to IL-2 therapy, which was absolutely the wrong therapy. And had that not happened, millions wouldn't have died from HIV.
All right, Brian. There's a lot to unpack in those statements, don't you think?
Yeah, and most of it would require a small class in immunology, which I am not prepared to give.
But you know what we could give a class in? How medicine responds to a new threat. If we have a new disease that comes to us, something that is similar to something that we've seen before but different, we're used to dealing with infectious diseases. We're used to dealing with viral diseases. We're used to dealing with immunosuppression. Now, when HIV came along, it was something that was new. It had some elements of things that we were familiar with, and we started approaching treatment from an area of confidence and familiarity towards these new directions, but it was indeed a new direction. Is it common that as soon as a new disease comes out, we immediately have a new cure for it? Or
not even close to it.
Is there a period of trial while we try and find the best approach to treating a new condition?
Yeah, there's absolutely a set of trials. And of course, that's how we started the use of AZT. AZT had already existed. It was just one of those things to where it was something that's found that had some sort of effect in prolonging the life of people on it.
Yes.
We had to go through more therapies from there. Even her own work, when it comes to monocytes, she's saying that she knew that IL-2 therapy wasn't something that wasn't something good. She did her work on downregulation of expression and following IL-2 through monocytes. So she's really telling a very weird story now. She's saying she knew it in 84, did work on it in 99, but she was also simultaneously in the group of people that was wrong in 91. I don't know what timeline she's created out of this, but it's not normal.
It's a rather twisted one. Perhaps it's a quantum timeline of some sort where we have an uncertainty principle and she just pops up here and there at key moments in history to save the day.
I guess so.
I mean, I knew quantum mechanics would be good for something eventually. Maybe it explains her activity in the HIV crisis. In any event, let's go listen to some more. This is kind of fun.
Who's giving global advice for health own a patent in the solution in the vaccine. Isn't that a conflict of interest, or shouldn't it be?
It is a conflict of interest. And in fact, this is one of the things that I've been saying and would like to say to President Trump: repeal the Bayh-Dole Act.
Bayh-Dole fundamentally changed the way universities approach technology transfer. And you can see that best in the statistics. Universities obtain 16 times as many patents today as they did in 1980. Now, everybody's getting more patents, but still, universities' share of all patents in the United States is more than 5 times greater than it was before Bayh-Dole.
All right. This needs to be unpacked a little bit as well. So we're going to go ahead and bring Bryan back in, and then we're going to talk about this for a minute. All right, Bryan, did you feel the bile coming up in your lower gastroesophageal tract, or your lower esophagus with that?
It was a little sickening, not going to lie.
All right. Well, first of all, let's look at the two things that she's talking about. The first one is researchers profiting from patents directly due to their research. Is that what you got from that?
And I don't know why she would want to stop that.
All right, but she's saying that that's bad. Now, I don't know if you happened to watch a recent series that I had. For example, we had a researcher that wrote a paper, which was subsequently retracted, trying to link the MMR vaccination to Crohn's disease and eventually to autism. Do you recall that paper that came out in the Lancet?
Good old Mr. Well, yeah, I guess I'm going to call him Mr. Wakefield now.
Yeah,
good old
Mr.
Wakefield.
Good old Mr. Wakefield. Now, the bad guy in this was the MMR vaccination. That is the entire thrust of his research, was to show that the MMR had a link with autism. Do you recall that?
I do recall that, and I'm pretty sure that he was also in the development of a standalone measles vaccine. He was actually looking for a reason to disregard the trivalent vaccine, which was the MMR.
Correct. Now, actually, there is a documented patent application from Dr. Andrew Wakefield for two things that predated his actual study. In other words, he filed for the patents first, and then he conducted his study. The first one was for a univalent measles vaccination to replace the MMR, which he had hoped, apparently, that his study would force off the market. And the other one was a patent for an immunological test to test for the viral antigens in the MMR version of the measles, so that parents and attorneys could get documentation that their child's autism was the result of an MMR vaccination. He had the patent on that test too. They estimated between the United Kingdom and North America, something like once the test was manufactured and in widespread use, they were anticipating a market of $75 million a year. And Wakefield was the primary investor in that. So what he did was he patented these tests, and then he did a study creating the need for his test. He started a vaccine panic to make a profit by selling those that were panicking a test to see whether or not their child's autism was a result of an MMR vaccination. Now, I don't see that she's mentioning that at all.
No, because that person too much aligns with the money that is funding this particular documentary.
Okay, so she's taking funding for this documentary from people that are backers of Wakefield, but withholds adverse information on Wakefield because the money is coming from people that are supporters of Wakefield. Is that kind of the impression that you're getting?
I think when it comes to her saying that there's an issue with conflict of interest, she has the shoe on the wrong foot.
Yeah, I would say so too. I would definitely say so. Now, this Bayh-Dole Act that they're talking about right here, did you look into that at all?
No, it's one of the few things I didn't look up.
I did look into it. And here's what it is. All right. Now, when taxpayer-supported money goes to fund research and developments come from that research that are patentable and can be exploited for profit, who owns the patent? The federal government does, because they funded the work. All right. The problem is the federal government is not in the business of medical research or virology or engineering or anything else. So what they did was they came up with this law that said, look, if a university develops something that's patentable and potentially exploitable, they can own the patent for it. However, the royalties from the patent go to the federal government with a very small amount that goes to the people that actually developed the technology in the paper. All right. Now, the other problem that you ran into was, well, if you had all these new developments, the federal government owned the patent on it, and then it didn't know what to do with the patents, so they just kind of collected dust in a file cabinet somewhere. And then private industry, if they take over the patents, it's up to them to decide whether or not they want to exploit those patents. So, for example, is the patentable idea profitable enough that they can pay dividends to their investors? So even though they may now own the patents, they may not necessarily use those patents. The other aspect of the law is that if private industry is not exploiting the patent for the benefit of mankind, the federal government can take it back and give it to another industry for them to exploit. So there's an incentive to actually do something with this research. And that's what the law does. It's actually a pretty good law. I mean, do you see a flaw in there?
No, because the government, the only place that could fall apart is if there's significant corporate capture. And we may be close to that at this point, but still, the fundamentals of the law are great.
You know, one of the most underpaid professionals that we run into are teachers. And when you're dealing with research scientists at university, you know, getting a little patent money is actually kind of a big boon to them. You know, that makes a significant difference in their life. Now, as it turns out, the patents that she's talking about with Dr. Tony there, he actually, you know, his partner got like $45,000 over a period of 9 years as a result of this patent. So we're not talking a huge quantity of money. I assume that he got that same amount, but he just didn't like the idea, so he simply donated it to charity. Mm-hmm. You know, he didn't want to profit because he worked for the federal government. And he donated his share to charity. So how much of your integrity will $45,000 buy, Brian?
Not a great deal. That's not, even for a resident, that's less than my yearly salary. Yeah. That doesn't do much for me.
And remember, you're a scut monkey. You know, you're not a big, high paid doctor like me. All right. $45,000 be a hell of a lot of money for you. And quite frankly,
it's not worth causing a huge fuss, though. I mean, that's chump change compared to what I will be doing. I don't need to be in a situation where I would be compromised for $45,000.
Do you honestly think that that is the level of integrity you're dealing with? I don't. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video where we had a look at the background behind the video Plandemic. We looked at the evidence that was presented, and Brian and I discussed it. This video has very little to do with the COVID-19 pandemic, despite its title. What this video is really about is the anti-vax movement. So in our next episode, we're going to look at the anti-vax aspects of the video Plandemic. I hope that you'll join me. Take care. This is Bob the Science Guy signing out from Northern Michigan, and we'll see you on the flip side.